The market lanes buzzed with the usual clamor of voices and footsteps, merchants hawking their wares and women bargaining for cloth and spices. Rena, with her neat braid and worn basket slung over her arm, moved gracefully through the crowd. Her fingers brushed against bolts of fabric, her eyes measuring color and quality with a trained glance. The seamstress's shop she worked in had come to rely on her keen eye and deft hands, though she remained humble in manner, her smile soft when she spoke to the townsfolk. It was on one such afternoon, beneath the swaying banners of the spring market, that Damon first truly noticed her. Son of the richest merchant in the region, Damon strode through the streets with his usual swagger. His fine boots barely touched the dusty road, his silk tunic gleaming beneath a heavy gold chain. Wherever he passed, people bowed or made way, not out of respect but out of caution. His temper was known, his cruelty whispered about behind closed doors. When he saw Rena that day bent over a merchant's table examining fine thread, something in her calm presence caught his eye. She was not like the painted girls of the court, nor the scheming daughters of the merchant clans. There was a quiet strength in her, a grace that seemed untouched by wealth or vanity. Damon's interest was piqued. He stood watching her for a moment longer than was polite, and when she moved to another stall, he followed. At first, he approached with smooth words and a charming smile. "Good day, lovely one. Such skilled hands must belong to a fine craftswoman." Rena turned, surprised. Recognizing him, her expression remained polite but distant. "Thank you, my lord. I am but a simple seamstress." He watched her with keen interest. "Too modest. Surely one with such beauty and talent deserves finer company. Perhaps you would do me the honor of dining with me?" Rena's heart tensed. She had heard the stories of Damon, how he treated servants harshly, how he flaunted his power, how he did not take kindly to refusal. But she was not one to encourage what she did not welcome. With care in her voice she answered, "I thank you for your offer, but I must decline. My work keeps me busy and I do not seek such company." For a moment, Damon's smile twitched, the charm slipping. But then he chuckled, brushing off her refusal as if it amused him. "Ah, shy as well. I like that. No matter, another time perhaps." Rena dipped her head politely and turned away, hoping the matter was done. But it was not. In the days that followed, Damon's attention became more pointed. Wherever she went, to fetch thread, to deliver finished garments, she would find him nearby. At first he would merely watch. Then he began sending lavish gifts, fine ribbons, expensive perfume, jewelry too rich for her modest life. Each time, Rena returned the gift through the merchant's servants, her refusal quiet but firm. Was not enough. Damon grew restless, his pride pricked by her coldness. He began to speak more boldly, approaching her in the street before watchful eyes. "You insult me, little seamstress," he said once when she refused again. "Many would beg for my notice." "I seek only peace," Rena replied softly. "Please leave me to my work." But Damon's obsession only deepened. At night, he brooded over his humiliation. That a girl of no station would dare defy him. Him, the heir to vast fortunes. His friends laughed, urging him to forget her. But their mockery only stoked his anger. He began to follow her more openly. When she delivered dresses to the homes of noble ladies, he would be near. In the market his eyes would find her. The town's women began to whisper, warning Rena to be careful. "Be wary," the old baker's wife told her. "Damon's temper is dark. He is not one to let a slight go." Rena's mentor at the seamstress shop, old Mistress Jalia, grew fearful as well. "Child, perhaps it is best you stay home for a time. He grows too bold." But Rena would not hide in fear. "I have done nothing wrong," she said quietly. "I will not cower." Yet her heart beat heavy with unease. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her now at every turn. The streets seemed colder. The market less safe. One evening, as the sun sank low and shadows stretched across the stone lanes, Rena finished her work late and began the walk home. Her basket was light, her steps quick. She kept to the well-trodden paths, though her pulse raced. The streets were quiet now. The shops shuttered. Only the distant murmur of voices drifted from the inns. Turning down a narrow alley that led toward her home, she sensed movement behind her. Before she could cry out, a strong hand grabbed her arm. "Did you think you could humiliate me so easily?" Damon's voice hissed in her ear. She struggled, her breath sharp. "Let me go." But his grip tightened. His eyes burned with anger and something darker still. "You will regret this, little seamstress. You will see, no one refuses me." Shoving her roughly against the wall, he finally released her and stalked off into the shadows, leaving her shaken and gasping. That night Rena could not sleep. Fear tangled in her thoughts. Damon's words echoed in her mind. She knew now, this was no harmless pursuit. His obsession was dangerous. But still the next day she rose and went to her work. Her hands trembled slightly as she stitched, but her resolve remained. She would not live in fear. Yet even as she worked, a dark current had begun to swirl around her life. Damon's obsession was sharpening, his wounded pride turning to bitter hatred. And in the shadows of his heart, a terrible thought was forming. Soon the days of polite refusals would be past. Soon he would strike in a way no one could forget. The marketplace swelled with life that morning, merchants shouting their wares, townsfolk haggling over goods, children darting between stalls with laughter ringing through the air. Rena moved among them with her basket tucked against her side, head slightly bowed but not in shame, only in the habit of someone used to blending in. Yet her presence did not go unnoticed. Whispers followed her wherever she went, eyes lingering too long, though no one dared speak aloud of what they saw. 4 weeks now, the village had buzzed with murmurs of Damon's pursuit of her. First the gifts, then the bold approaches, and finally the troubling encounter in the alley. Word of his obsession traveled swiftly, though few dared comment within earshot of the merchant's household. Damon's father, Master Heron, held great sway over the town's fortunes, and most preferred not to anger such a man. Still, sympathies lay with Rena. Many pitied the quiet seamstress who had done nothing to invite such attention. But pity was not protection. Rena felt the shift in the air as she reached the fabric stall. A hush seemed to follow her steps. The merchant behind the table smiled nervously, his eyes flicking to the side. Rena sensed why even before she turned. There, lounging beneath the shade of a bright canopy, was Damon. Dressed in his finest, embroidered tunic, gleaming boots. He watched her approach with an expression too smug to be mistaken. His friends stood nearby, laughing too loudly at some jest. When Rena reached for a roll of soft linen, Damon stepped forward. "Lovely Rena," he said, voice smooth as silk. "Surely you remember me." "I do," Rena replied, her tone steady but cold. "And I have made my wishes clear." Damon's smile faltered for the briefest moment, then returned sharper. "Ah, but you wound me. I had hoped time might soften your heart." He gestured grandly. "Come, join me for wine. Let us put this foolishness behind us." A hush fell over the nearby stalls. Merchants paused, customers turned. The entire square seemed to lean in, breath held. It was one thing for Damon to pursue her in private. Another entirely to call her out in the heart of the town. Rena drew a quiet breath. Fear coiled within her, but she would not bow. "Not here. Not before all." "I will not join you," she said, voice clear. "I do not welcome your attentions. I ask you again, leave me be." A ripple of gasps stirred the air. Damon's eyes darkened. For a long moment, he stared at her, and beneath the thin mask of charm, his rage simmered. "You think yourself too fine for me?" His words came low and dangerous. "A seamstress dares reject the son of Master Heron? You forget your place." "I know my place," Rena answered, chin lifting slightly. "And I will not be treated like something to be owned." The square fell utterly silent. Even the children's laughter faded. From behind the safety of their stalls, the villagers watched, wide-eyed. No one dared speak, but hearts beat faster. No one, no woman, had ever defied Damon so plainly. No man had risked confronting him either. His father's wealth and power protected him. But Rena's courage struck like a spark on dry straw. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Damon's face twisted, his lips pulling into a cruel sneer. "You will regret this," he hissed. "Mark my words, before long, you will wish you had bowed to me." Without another glance, he spun on his heel and stalked away, his friends trailing behind him. The gathered villagers remained frozen, glancing nervously between Rena and the retreating figure. Slowly life returned to the market. Murmured voices rose once more. The old fabric merchant leaned toward Rena, eyes wide with worry. "Child, you were brave, but you've angered him. He is not one to forget." Rena gathered her basket, her hands trembling only slightly. "I will not live in fear," she said softly, though her heart pounded hard. She offered the merchant a faint smile and moved away, aware of the eyes that followed her steps. That evening, as the sun dipped low and long shadows stretched across the cobbled streets, the whispers began anew. In every tavern, at every hearth, the tale spread. How Rena had refused Damon in front of all, how his face had burned with fury, how he had sworn vengeance. Some praised her courage. Others shook their heads in warning. In her small rented room above the seamstress shop, Rena sat by the window, her needle forgotten in her lap. The distant sounds of the town drifted upward, the clink of tankards, the chatter of voices. Yet beneath it all she felt the weight of unseen eyes, the presence of a threat not yet revealed. Mistress Jalia knocked softly and entered, her lined face drawn with worry. "You must be careful, child," she urged. "You know what men like Damon can do." "I cannot undo what was said," Rena replied. "And I will not pretend to welcome what I do not." Her voice was steady, but the old woman could see the weariness in her eyes. "Then we must pray it is enough," Jalia murmured. But even as she spoke, Damon paced the halls of his father's grand estate, his mind dark with fury. The public shame of her refusal gnawed at his pride. His friends' laughter still rang in his ears. Worse still, the whispers of the townsfolk mocked him now, a man of wealth bested by a seamstress? No, he would not suffer such insult. In the recesses of his bitter heart, a new plan took shape, one cruel, one meant to break her spirit beyond repair. And far across the town, though she did not yet know it, Rena's quiet defiance had set a dangerous course in motion. The days following the confrontation in the marketplace passed in a strange hush. The town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next turn of events. Rena continued her work in the seamstress shop with quiet determination, but the eyes that followed her in the streets had changed. Some looked on with admiration for her courage, others with pity and more still with fear not for her but of what Damon might do next. Rena felt it too, a sense of unease shadowing her every step. Damon had vanished from the public eye since that day. No more bold appearances in the square, no more unwanted advances. But his absence did not bring relief. Rather, it heightened the tension as though the town awaited a storm. Mistress Jalia begged her to stay in at night, to be cautious. "He will not let this lie," the old woman warned. "You have shamed him before the whole town. Men like that do not forgive." But Rena could not bring herself to live in fear. She still made her daily errands, still visited the market when she must. The town was her home. Why should she surrender it to the whims of a cruel man? It was on a cool evening, after a long day of mending garments for a wedding, that Rena found herself leaving the shop later than usual. The sun had already dipped below the rooftops, the sky painted in deep shades of violet and indigo. The streets were quieter now, the crowds thinned. Lanterns flickered in doorways, casting long shadows. She gathered her things, bidding Mistress Jalia good night, and began the familiar walk home. Her path led through a narrow side street, one she had walked 100 times without fear. Tonight, though, her steps felt heavier, her heart more aware of the darkened corners. Halfway down the lane, where the buildings pressed close and the street lamps were few, a noise behind her made her pause, soft footsteps too close. Before she could turn, a figure lunged from the shadows. A rough hand seized her arm, yanking her backward. Rena gasped, her basket falling to the ground, the contents scattering. In the dim light she saw him, Damon. His face twisted with rage, eyes wild. "You think you can humiliate me?" he spat. "You think you can shame me before the town? Let me go." Rena struggled, terror surging through her veins. "Leave me alone." But Damon's grip only tightened. His breath reeked of wine and hatred. From beneath his cloak, he drew a small, stoppered vial, its glass catching what little light there was. His hand trembled, but his eyes gleamed with vicious intent. "If I cannot have your beauty," he hissed, "then no one will." Realization struck Rena a split second too late. She tried to wrench free, tried to cry out, but in a single horrible motion, Damon uncorked the vial and flung its contents at her face. The liquid struck with a sickening hiss. An instant later, Rena's scream tore through the still night, a sound of pure, unthinkable agony. Her hands flew to her face as the acid burned through skin and flesh. The pain was beyond words, a searing fire that consumed her world. She stumbled, fell to her knees, her screams echoing down the street. Doors flung open. Villagers rushed out, drawn by the terrible cries. Someone shouted, "Fetch water. Quickly." Another ran for the healer. Damon was already gone, vanished into the shadows. When the first villagers reached her, they gasped in horror. Rena's face, once so bright and kind, was a ruin of burned flesh and raw wounds. Her body convulsed with sobs, her hands clawing at the stones. "Hold her still." "Gently," an old man urged, tearing off his cloak to drape over her shoulders. Water was brought, cool cloths pressed against her face, but the damage was done. The acid had left its mark, cruel and deep. As more villagers gathered, a somber mood fell over the crowd. Some wept openly at the sight. Others whispered in shock. Who could do such a thing? It was him, an old woman said bitterly. Damon. Who else? But no one dared speak too loudly. Fear of the merchant's wrath still lingered. The healer arrived at last, pushing through the crowd. With practiced care she examined Rena's wounds, her face grim. We must get her inside. Now. Together they lifted the trembling girl and carried her to the healer's house. There, beneath the light of flickering candles, the healer worked swiftly, cleaning, dressing, doing all she could to ease the suffering. Rena drifted in and out of consciousness, her body racked with pain, her mind a blur of terror and loss. The memory of Damon's face, his twisted words, haunted her even as the fever set in. For days the village buzzed with news of the attack. Whispers spread from house to house. Everyone knew who had done it, but none dared confront Master Heron's son. The law was weak against such wealth. Mistress Jalia came often to sit by Rena's side, her old hands clutching the younger woman's trembling fingers. You are strong, child, she whispered. You will endure. But in the quiet moments between the pain, Rena wondered if she wanted to. Her face, her very being, had been stolen from her. All for the pride of a cruel man. Yet somewhere deep within her, beneath the layers of grief and agony, a spark remained. She had survived the attack. And that, perhaps, would be the beginning of something neither Damon nor his father could have foreseen. The nights that followed seemed endless. In the healer's small chamber, Rena hovered between sleep and waking, her body fevered and weak. Pain laced through her veins, dull and sharp all at once. Each shallow breath was a fight, each tiny movement a reminder of what had been done. Her once smooth skin now lay beneath layers of clean linen, salves gently applied to stave off infection. But the healer's skill could only do so much. The burns were deep. The scars would remain. Word of the attack spread like wildfire through the village, igniting whispers behind every closed door and hurried conversation in the marketplace. Everyone knew what had happened, though few would say his name aloud. Damon. The son of Master Heron. The man who had dared to do such a monstrous thing. And yet, Damon was nowhere to be found. The very night of the attack he had fled. Some said he'd stolen one of his father's fine horses and ridden hard toward the next province. Others whispered he'd been spirited away by servants to avoid justice. No one truly knew, and none dared ask Master Heron openly. The old merchant, for his part, went about his business with cold, stiff propriety. He made no mention of his son's deeds, refused to speak of the attack, and curtly dismissed anyone who dared bring it up. But beneath the surface of his stern gaze, tension simmered. He could not control the tide of rumor, nor silence the growing anger among the townsfolk. The people of the village, those who had seen Rena's kindness, those who had admired her courage, could not forget what they'd witnessed. And they did not forgive. She was always a good girl, one woman murmured at the market. Never asked for trouble. It's wicked what he's done. Where is the constable? Another asked bitterly. Why hasn't he arrested that wretch? The answer was simple and sour on every tongue. Master Heron's wealth, his connections, his influence. No one wanted to provoke his wrath, not the town elders, nor the guards sworn to uphold the peace. But something deeper stirred beneath the surface, an unease that went beyond politics or propriety. It began with small things. The air in the village seemed heavier, colder at dawn. Crows gathered in greater numbers than usual, their cries harsh and unceasing. At night, the wind whispered through the narrow streets, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. The baker's wife spoke of strange dreams, shadows creeping through her home, voices she could not understand. Old grandmother Neva, the midwife, shook her head knowingly when she heard the talk. Dark deeds bring dark forces, she said grimly. When a man harms the innocent, the world does not turn a blind eye. There is balance, always balance. And so the tension grew. In the healer's house, Rena's strength slowly returned. Her body remained weak, but her spirit, though battered, did not break. She refused to give in to despair, though tears came easily when she caught her reflection, a face she barely recognized, scarred and raw. One afternoon, as the healer changed her bandages, Mistress Jalia came to sit beside her, eyes kind but solemn. Child, she said softly, you are not alone in this. The town knows what was done to you. They are afraid, but they are angry too. Rena's voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Angry enough to stop him? Mistress Jalia sighed, her gaze drifting to the shuttered window. In time perhaps. But there are other forces at work now. You must be strong. Rena nodded, though weariness tugged at her heart. Her life had been simple once, sewing, working, dreaming of a future she might shape with her own hands. Now all had changed. And in the village beyond, the signs of change grew more visible. A merchant's cart overturned without cause, horses spooked by unseen shadows. Milk soured overnight in several homes. Fires burned lower than they should, smoke curling in strange, shifting patterns. The priest at the old chapel began offering prayers more fervently, his face pale. The villagers whispered of a curse, of the spirits stirred by Damon's cruelty. No one dared name it aloud, but the fear was real. At the heart of it all lay the unspoken truth. Balance had been broken. And balance would demand its due. The long weeks of pain and fever slowly gave way to something else, something deeper than simple healing. Rena, lying beneath the pale linen of the healer's bed, began to feel it stirring within her. Not hope, not yet, but something sharper, more precise. A purpose. Her face, once admired for its softness and grace, was no longer her shield against the world. The mirror told her that plainly enough when she was finally strong enough to rise and look. The reflection staring back was that of a stranger, scarred, twisted, and unfamiliar. The first time she saw it, her knees nearly buckled. The healer, wise and patient, steadied her. "This is not the end of you," the healer said, voice low but strong. "A face is only a mask. The heart beneath it, that is what matters." At first, Rena wanted to believe her words but couldn't. Grief for what she had lost clouded her mind. The first nights after seeing her reflection were the hardest. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by the memory of Damon's sneer, the feel of the acid searing her skin, the sound of her own screams. Yet, with each passing day, something in her shifted. The pain that had consumed her began to give way to anger, not wild or vengeful, but cold and clear. Damon had tried to ruin her life. He had failed. With the help of the healer and Mistress Jalia, Rena began to rebuild what had been broken. At first, her steps were small, rising from her bed, walking the length of the room. Then further, out into the garden, where the scent of herbs and flowers eased the tightness in her chest. Her body was weak, but her will grew stronger with each effort. It was during one of these walks that she met the old wise woman. Grandmother Neva, the midwife known for her herbs and her strange knowledge of things unseen, came to the healer's house one afternoon, bringing bundles of dried flowers and jars of dark ointment. She sat by Rena's side, her gaze sharp and knowing. "You have come through the fire," Neva said softly. "And though it has marked you, it has also forged you." Rena, still hesitant to speak of her feelings, looked away. But Neva's voice drew her back. "Do not shrink from what has happened," the old woman continued. "There is strength in surviving what others would not. You may feel broken now, but the cracks will make you stronger." There was something in her tone, a certainty that seemed to reach deep into Rena's heart. For the first time since the attack, she felt understood. Neva did not pity her, nor treat her as fragile. Instead, she spoke as if Rena still had a role to play in the world, one of importance. "Justice," Neva whispered later as they prepared a new salve for Rena's wounds. "Justice will come, child. But it comes to those who claim it, not to those who hide." Those words burned within Rena's soul. As her strength returned, she asked to help with the chores in the healer's home, preparing herbs, boiling water, grinding roots. Her hands, though shaking at first, steadied with practice. The work gave her focus, drew her mind away from grief and toward action. The villagers who brought supplies or came to check on her began to see the change. Though her face was scarred, her eyes held a new light. A quiet fire. No longer the shy young seamstress, Rena carried herself with a different air now, one born of survival, of a will unbroken. The whispers in the village grew. "She should have died from such a wound," some said in awe. "Yet she lives. She is stronger than we thought." With every passing day, Rena's resolve hardened. She would not live in hiding. She would not allow Damon's crime to define her. He had tried to destroy her spirit, he had failed. Now she would seek justice, not only for herself but to ensure that no other girl would suffer as she had. One crisp morning, as sunlight filtered through the leaves outside the healer's house, Mistress Jalia found Rena standing at the window, her back straight, her gaze clear. "You are ready," the old seamstress said softly, a note of pride in her voice. Rena nodded. "I will not be silent." The time for fear had passed. A new strength burned within her now, tempered by suffering, honed by courage. She would face whatever came next, and she would face it on her own terms. The first whispers came long before anyone saw him. A merchant traveling from the north claimed to have seen Damon in a neighboring town, well-dressed, swaggering, and speaking as though nothing had happened. It was said he boasted of new deals, new ventures, as if the shadows of his crime had faded with time. But time, as Damon would soon learn, was no ally to guilt. It was late summer when his return became undeniable. One morning, under a pale sky, a fine black carriage rolled into the village square. Damon stepped out, clad in a deep green coat, his face smug, eyes gleaming with arrogant confidence. He walked with the same air of entitlement he had always worn, as though the earth itself owed him favor. Some villagers turned away when they saw him. Others stood in stunned silence. No one welcomed him openly. Yet Damon seemed blind to the tension, or perhaps simply didn't care. In his mind, the village was weak, forgetful. His father's gold had paved the way for his return, and now he would reclaim his place. He set to work quickly, visiting merchants, speaking with the town elders, making bold promises about restoring business and fortune. He acted as though the months of disgrace had been nothing but a passing storm. But the village had not forgotten. Behind the polite smiles, Damon's old allies grew distant. Master Varen, once eager for partnership, now spoke coolly, declining deals. Mistress Helena, the innkeeper, found reasons not to rent him rooms. Even the guards, who had once turned a blind eye to his cruelty, seemed colder in their stares. Damon felt at first as an unease, an itch at the back of his mind. He dismissed it, convinced that time would heal the village's memory. But each passing day chipped away at his bravado. Odd things began to happen. The fine silks he imported arrived torn or moth-eaten. A new shipment of spices spoiled inexplicably. Horses that had once obeyed him grew restless in his presence, stamping their hooves, eyes wide with unease. And the nights were worse. At first, it was simple restlessness. Damon would wake, heart racing, drenched in sweat, unable to remember why. But soon the dreams came, visions of burning light, of a face half shrouded in scars, staring at him through the dark. Rina's eyes. He would wake gasping, the image seared into his mind. Foolish dreams, he told himself. Just guilt. But the dreams grew stronger. In them he heard her voice, not weak or pleading but clear, cold with purpose. You will not escape this. By day Damon's temper frayed. He snapped at servants, cursed at merchants, demanding why his fortunes faltered. None dared tell him the truth. The village no longer feared him. And the shadow of his crime still hung over every word he spoke. He returned to his father's house, pacing the halls in frustration. Even Master Heron, once so fierce in his defense of Damon, now watched him with wary eyes. The old merchant could sense the shift in the town, the growing isolation that clung to his son. One night, driven by drink and anger, Damon rode out into the village, determined to confront the people, to demand respect. But the streets were empty. Lights dimmed as he passed. No one greeted him. He reached the market square and dismounted, shouting for an audience. Only the cold wind answered. Then from the shadows a figure stepped forward. It was the old wise woman, Grandmother Neva. She stood firm, her gaze piercing. You should not have come back, she said simply. Damon sneered. Old crone. You think you can frighten me? But her voice was calm, her words sharp. It is not I who haunts your nights. It is not I who turns your allies cold. The balance seeks you. And balance will be met. For a moment, Damon felt a chill deeper than the night air. But pride won out and he laughed, turning away. Yet the words lingered in his mind. In the days that followed, his nightmares deepened. He dreamed of fire and pain, of voices chanting in a language he could not understand. His reflection in the mirror seemed altered, his skin pale, eyes sunken. The villagers avoided his gaze. His father's wealth could no longer shield him. And through it all, one truth became clear to Damon at last. He could not undo what he had done. The village would not forget. And something far beyond human hands, was watching. The winds shifted in the village, not in direction but in feeling. Where once the streets buzzed with daily chatter, now voices dropped when Damon passed by. Behind closed doors and quiet homes the whispers grew louder. Karma, they said. The old balance. Something has been stirred. It began with small signs. A merchant's cart wheel shattered in the middle of the square without warning. The blacksmith's fire refused to catch for 3 nights. Children, normally bright with play, spoke of strange shadows flickering near the well. And always the story circled back to one thing, the return of Damon. It is his doing, some murmured. The crime cannot rest. Others spoke in older words, of a curse not born of witchcraft, but of the natural order. A wound had been made upon the village, and the world would not allow it to heal until justice was served. Grandmother Neva heard the talk and her face grew grave. One cool morning, leaning on her carved staff, she made her way to Master Heron's great house. The servants admitted her nervously, for none dared ignore the old wise woman. She found Damon alone in his father's study, pacing restlessly, a flask of wine already in hand though the sun had barely risen. His eyes were bloodshot, the shadows beneath them deep. Sleep eluded him still. The dreams gnawed at his mind, Rena's eyes, her voice, the burning that would not fade. Grandmother Neva stood before him, calm, unshaken. "You have done great harm," she said. "And the harm stirs forces you do not understand. The balance must be restored." Damon scoffed, though his voice held a tremor. "Old fool. You speak of fairy tales. What balance? My father's gold can buy peace." But the wise woman only shook her head. Gold cannot buy what is owed to the earth. It cannot silence the voices of the wronged. With that, she turned and left him standing alone, anger flaring in his chest. Yet as her words echoed in the empty room, a deeper part of him quailed. He drank deeply, but the wine no longer dulled his fear. While Damon spiraled, another figure began to rise. Rena. Her days of weakness were behind her. The healer's care and Grandmother Neva's wisdom had restored not only her strength but her spirit. Each scar upon her face was a mark of survival, a testament to what she had endured. No longer did she hide within the healer's house. Now she walked the village openly. At first people turned to stare, some in pity, some in shame. But Rena met their eyes with quiet, unwavering strength. Word spread quickly. The girl once broken now stood taller than before. Children no longer mocked her. They watched in awe as she moved through the market, fetching herbs for Mistress Jalia or helping mend garments at the old seamstress's shop. Even the men who once averted their gaze, now greeted her with respect. And from the shadows Damon watched. He saw her in the square, head high, her ruined face bared without fear. He heard the whispers as villagers spoke of her courage. Each word burned deeper than any blade. "She is not broken," they said. "She is stronger now." The more Damon heard, the more the walls of his pride began to crumble. He prowled his father's halls, snapping at servants, rage simmering beneath his skin. He cursed Rena's name, cursed the village, cursed the old woman who dared to speak of balance. But it was no use. The tide had turned. And through it all, the whispers grew. Karma, karma will come. The fall came swifter than anyone expected. In a matter of weeks, Damon's fortune began to unravel. It started with the silks. A large shipment from the city arrived soaked through with seawater, the vibrant dyes ruined. Word spread quickly among his merchant partners. Damon's goods were cursed, bad luck followed his trade. Then the grain stores were found infested with rot, though they'd been sealed tight. His creditors began to circle, pressing for repayment, but his gold seemed to vanish faster than he could count it. And then came the final blow. His father, Master Heron, summoned him in the dead of night. The old man's face, once proud, was cold with fury. "You've brought shame to this house." The villagers whisper of curses. "No one will trade with us. You are no son of mine." Before Damon could speak, guards escorted him out of the manor with nothing but the clothes on his back. He stumbled through the streets, the villagers' cold stares cutting deeper than any blade. Doors closed as he passed. Where once he had commanded respect through fear, now he was met only with scorn and silence. And the accidents followed him still. A falling beam missed him by inches at the old tavern. A loose will sent a cart crashing into the road where he stood. No matter where he went, shadows seemed to follow. Sleep became impossible. When it came, it brought only fevered nightmares, visions of Rena, her scarred face gleaming in moonlight, her eyes burning with unspoken words. His own voice would rise in screams that no one came to answer. Desperation finally drove him to the one person he had mocked. At dawn, Damon sought out Grandmother Neva. He found her in the herb garden behind her cottage, stooped over a bed of lavender. For the first time in his life he dropped to his knees, pride shattered. "Please," he rasped, "lift this curse." The old woman looked up, her eyes sharp as glass. "I told you once, you cannot buy balance. I was wrong. Please, tell me what to do." She straightened, her gaze unwavering. "The balance is not mine to mend. It lies with the one you wronged." Realization struck Damon like a blow. Rena. He stumbled back, the weight of his fear pressing down. The woman he had tried to destroy now held the power he had lost. No gold, no pleading, no false apology could undo what had been set in motion. And with each passing breath, the truth settled deeper in his bones. Karma would not be cheated. The sky hung low over the village square, gray clouds rolling thick and heavy with the weight of an approaching storm. It was market day, and though the stalls were full, a strange hush lingered in the air. The villagers spoke softly, glancing toward the road that led from the hills. Rumor had spread. Damon had returned again. No longer the proud merchant's son, he was a shadow of his former self. Word of his fall traveled faster than any cart. Disowned, penniless, plagued by ill fortune, and driven mad by guilt. For weeks he had been seen wandering the outskirts, eyes hollow, muttering to himself. But today something had drawn him back into the heart of the village. Rena stood at the center of the square. She wore no veil to cover her scars. Dressed simply, her presence was steady, her gaze calm. Over the past moons she had grown into herself, a pillar of quiet strength. The villagers now treated her with respect, some even with reverence. Where once pity and cruelty had marked her path, now honor followed in her steps. And so when Damon's gaunt figure staggered into view, every head turned. He was barely recognizable, hair unkempt, clothes torn, eyes darting with fevered desperation. His skin was pale, sickly, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool air. Whispers rose from the crowd, but none dared approach him. It was as though the earth itself held its breath. Damon stumbled toward the square, his gaze locked on Rena as though drawn by an unseen force. His breath came in ragged gasps, his steps uneven. Fear and shame warred in his eyes, but something deeper drove him forward, a need to face what haunted his every waking moment. When he reached the edge of the circle, he stopped, trembling. His lips parted, but no words came. His once proud voice was gone, stripped bare by guilt. Rena turned her gaze toward him. Come. Unblinking. The crowd parted in silence, watching. For a long moment, the two stood there, one broken by his deeds, the other risen from her suffering. Then, in a voice soft but unwavering, Rena spoke a single word. Karma. It was not a curse nor a threat. It was a truth. A word that carried the weight of all that had passed, of justice unseen yet undeniable. Damon's breath hitched. His knees buckled and he staggered back as though struck. The crowd remained silent, no jeers, no pity, only the heavy presence of judgment. He looked around wildly, seeking escape from the eyes that saw him for what he was. Panic seized him. With a choked sob, Damon turned and fled, through the square, down the road, out beyond the village walls. He left behind the wealth he had lost, the power that had crumbled, the pride that had shattered. Only fear remained. And Rena, standing in the center of the square, watched him go. She did not smile nor weep. There was no triumph in her heart, only the deep, steady peace of one who had faced the storm and remained standing. Above, the clouds began to part, shafts of light breaking through. The villagers slowly returned to their lives, their glances toward Rena no longer filled with unease but with quiet respect. In that moment the wheel of fate turned. Balance had been served. The seasons turned. The sharp bite of winter gave way to the gentle breath of spring, and with it, new life stirred in the village. But something deeper had changed, an unseen shift in the heart of the people. No longer was Rena simply the seamstress's daughter, the girl who had once been mocked for her beauty, envied, then scarred by cruelty. Now she was something more, an emblem of resilience, a living story that passed from lips to ears around hearths and markets. It began quietly. One morning a young girl barely more than 14 came to her door. The child's eyes were rimmed red from tears, a bruised cheek betraying the violence in her home. She stood trembling until Rena opened the door wide and drew her in with a gentle hand. No words were needed. Rena had once been the frightened one seeking refuge. She understood. Soon others followed, women bruised not only in body but in spirit. Wives trapped in bitter marriages. Young girls fearing the claws of arrogant men. Even widows cast aside by greedy kin. They came to her not just for stitches and cloth, but for counsel, for strength. Rena gave them both. Her small home became a place of quiet gatherings. Grandmother Neva came often, bringing herbs and wisdom. Together they taught the women not to cower, but to stand. To speak. To demand respect in a world that too often denied them voice. Through whispered words and careful acts, change began to ripple outward. Where once insults would have followed Rena in the street, now heads bowed in respect. Children watched her with wide eyes, learning what true courage looked like. The men of the village, some humbled, some ashamed, gave her space and greeted her with cautious deference. And always she wore her scars openly, neither hidden nor flaunted but worn as they were, a truth, a testament to what she had endured and overcome. As for Damon's name, it faded like morning mist beneath the rising sun. Whispers of his fate grew rare, his story now one of warning, not reverence. Be careful, the elders told the young men. Lest pride and cruelty drag you down as it did him. Rena never spoke of him. There was no need. Her life had moved beyond vengeance or bitterness. It had grown into something larger, a beacon for others who still walked in shadows. One bright morning, as market bells chimed, the village square bustled with life. Among the stalls, Rena stood helping an elderly widow fasten her woven baskets. A young girl tugged at her sleeve, eyes bright. "Will you teach us to sew?" she asked. "Like you." Rena knelt, her voice soft but sure. "I will teach you more than that." The girl beamed. And so, under the clear sky of a new day, Rena's story continued, not bound by the cruelty of the past, but woven into the hope of what could yet be. Her scars, her strength, her spirit, these were her true beauty now. And the village at last had learned to see it. The dawn light slipped gently over the rooftops, painting the village in hues of gold and soft pink. Smoke curled from chimneys as fires were lit for morning meals, and the air buzzed faintly with birdsong. Life moved on, but it moved differently now. Much had changed since the day Damon had fled the square, broken and shamed. The villagers had watched in stunned silence as Rena stood tall, uttering that single word that echoed through every heart, karma. From that day forth, her life and place among them were no longer what they had been. No longer was she the scarred girl to be pitied or whispered about behind closed doors. Rena had become something else entirely, a symbol, a living reminder of resilience and strength. It was not immediate. Change, after all, took time. But the shift began with small acts, simple moments that rippled outward. At first, women who once avoided her gaze began to meet her eyes, offering shy smiles. The seamstress, her old mentor, openly asked Rena to return to her workshop, not as an apprentice but as an equal. In the market, children no longer stared in fear or curiosity at her face but waved eagerly when she passed. Even the elders of the village, who once ignored her presence, now greeted her with respectful nods. But it was among the women, those who had suffered in silence, that her new role grew strongest. They came in ones and twos, often at dusk or early morning. Young girls with frightened eyes. Mothers bruised in spirit and body. Widows cast aside by greedy kin. One by one they sought her out, not just for needle and thread but for guidance, for hope. Rena welcomed them all. Her small cottage soon became a place of refuge. The table that once held scraps of fabric now bore cups of warm tea, bread shared between trembling hands. Words flowed, soft at first but gaining strength. Secrets long buried came to light. Stories of cruelty and injustice. Fears that had no voice until now. Rena listened. And when they faltered, she reminded them, strength lived not in beauty or power but in the heart. If she could stand after what had been done to her, so could they. Grandmother Neva came often, her wisdom and presence a comfort. Together they taught these women how to reclaim their dignity. Not through vengeance or hate, but through self-respect, knowledge and unity. It was not long before others took notice. The men of the village, many humbled by the fall of Damon, grew wary of their words and deeds. No longer was it so easy to dismiss a woman's voice. No longer did cruelty pass without consequence. And Damon's name, once spoken with pride by his father and peers, became little more than a shadow. Few dared utter it now. Among the younger folk, it became a cautionary tale. "Do not be like him," they whispered, "or you too will be cast out." The great house of Master Heron stood cold and empty. His fortune had withered with his son's disgrace. The proud banners that once flew from its eaves had been taken down. No servants remained. And yet life in the village thrived. Rena returned to her work as a seamstress, her skill undiminished. But her shop was more than a place for garments. It became a gathering space. Girls came to learn not just sewing but the art of self-worth. Lessons in courage, in speaking truth, in standing together. In the market, she was no longer approached with hesitation. Villagers came freely, offering trade, seeking her counsel. The baker sent fresh loaves. The healer shared herbs. Even the miller's once proud wife offered a kind word, her tone marked with genuine respect. And as the seasons turned, so too did Rena's heart. She had once thought herself marked forever by pain. That her scars would be her shame, her burden. But now she wore them openly, not flaunted, not hidden. They were part of her story of who she was. And in them, others saw not ugliness but strength. It was during the first spring festival after Damon's fall that the true measure of change was seen. The village square was bright with lanterns and flowers. Music echoed through the streets. Where once Rena would have remained hidden in her home, this year she stood among them, dressed in a simple gown of deep green, her head held high. When she stepped onto the square, the crowd parted, not from fear but to welcome her in. A path opened to the center where the young dancers gathered. A small girl, no more than 8, ran to her, grasping her hand. "Will you dance with us?" she asked, eyes shining. Rena smiled. Of course. And so she danced, not for approval or pity but for joy. For life reclaimed. As the music swelled, villagers watched, not with pity but with admiration. The scars upon her face caught the lantern light, gleaming not as wounds, but as symbols of endurance. And when dawn came, the village awoke to a new truth. Rena was no longer the broken girl of yesterday. She was their example, their guide, their strength. A new dawn had come, not just for her but for all who would follow.